Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings happened in the thumb of Michigan in the Lower Peninsula. I am in my early 30s. I'm a millennial. I was born here in Michigan. I've lived here most of my life. I traveled a bit around the world. I haven't been too far, but I have enjoyed this state for all of its ups and downs my entire life. It's a beautiful place. You can do almost any kind of outdoor activity you want. You just think about it and you could do it. There's skiing and fishing, and so Michigan's a great place, and I've always loved this place, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But the first sighting happened when I was a young man in Michigan, but it was during the summer. It was very, very hot, and I was born in 1991, and this happened when I was about 13, 14 years old. So I was quite an adventurous young man. I grew up on a farm. I'm a fifth-generation farmer. It's kind of in the blood at this point. I don't think I could do anything else. It's a wonderful life. It's not an easy life necessarily, but it is a wonderful life. And one afternoon, this had to have been in August, back in possibly 2004, 2005. I was about 13 or 14 years old. It's kind of, it's one of those memories that you don't exactly remember the numbers, but you remember what happened. You remember the pictures, you remember the colors, you remember you were there, you know. So this one afternoon in the summer, we have in our area lots and lots of farms. It's way out in the country. The nearest town is 2,500 people, maybe 3,000 people max population. So everybody out here is a farmer and everybody knows each other. It's a very nice community. That afternoon, I think I had gotten done with my work and I wanted to go hunt for mushrooms. Now, there are lots of fields out here. Lots and lots of fields, lots of farms and little farms here and there. I mean, all the houses they're not all jammed close together, but you've got 3 or 4 neighbors on each mile. So, but there's also big stands of trees, and they're not necessarily super old growth forests, but there's forests in between, small forests. I don't know if you'd even call it a forest, but patches of trees here and there that are in between the farms and the farmhouses. And back in one of these big acreages of trees, there was, and is still to this day, the county gravel pit. And this gravel pit, I mean, it was a fun place when you were a kid. You know, there was giant puddles of tadpoles you could play with, and if anybody's ever seen a gravel pit, you kind of have a picture in your mind of what it looks like. It's about 2 stories of, 2 stories in the air of raw dirt and dirty sand that you can use for backfill, So it's nothing super special, but it was a place for us kids to go and play. So that afternoon, after I'd gotten done with my work and I was free, he cut me loose, I wanted to go back to that gravel pit and look for mushrooms. Now, I don't even remember if it was the proper time to look for morels. But my grandma had taken us back there when we were really little to look for mushrooms. And I don't even know if it was the right time of year, but I had it in my head that I was going to go look for mushrooms that day. So I hopped on the four-wheeler and I drove back to the gravel pit. I was just kind of poking around. I drove the four-wheeler up on top of the big berm of sand and, throwing rocks, just being a kid, looking for mushrooms, morels, but wasn't having much luck with the mushrooms, of course. I don't think they were in season. I was just a kid. But I was up on top of this berm of sand, kind of hunched over looking on the ground, looking for mushrooms. And I know it sounds very cliche, but this berm of sand, it's about 2 stories up in the air, and you can drive up on it. It's not super steep. But then there's the low area where the pit begins and where the drive is to come into the pit. And there was this patch of about waist-high grass, because they didn't really maintain the grass around the pit, so it all grew up. It grew up all year round, and nobody really weed whipped the grasses and the trees around the pit. So it was kind of wild back there. But so I was hunched over, looking at the ground, looking for mushrooms. And again, I know it sounds cliche, but I heard a branch break. I heard a twig snap. And I stood up, and I turned around, and I looked down at the area where the pit begins and the low-level area where you drive into the pit. And it was standing there. And it was looking up at me. Now, when you see a person, you see an average person just walking down the sidewalk, and they may be 100 feet away. You can still look at their face and see their features generally. You can see what color their hair is. You can see what clothes they're wearing. You can see if they're wearing jeans or shorts or shoes. You can make out these kind of descriptors on your average Joe. Even from 100 feet away, you can kind of tell. However, I was a bit high up in the air on this berm, and this creature was maybe 100 feet, maybe 120 feet away from me. And it was standing in the waist-high grass, right by the driveway that comes into the pit. And it was staring at me. Well, after I stood up and I studied what was going on for a minute, and I looked at this thing, and I tell you, it didn't. They say that some of these things have cone heads, and they say that some of these things don't have much of a neck. Well, this one really did not have much of a neck. It really looked like its head was planted right on top of its shoulders. And I could really only see from about the belly button up because of the tall grass. So I didn't see any breasts. I don't think it was a female. But it was black as coal. From head to toe, this creature was black as coal. The fur looked very consistent. Didn't look like its fur was spotty or like it had mange or anything. But what concerned me the most about the whole situation was, at first I stood up. I thought, oh, it's a person. You're just a kid. You don't think too hard about this stuff, and you say, this must be someone just watching me, someone coming to see what's going on. Well, I called out. I said, hello, how are you? What do you need? And I waved with my right hand. And this is kind of the creepier part, I guess, is it didn't really answer me. It didn't make much of a movement at all. It just stared at me for a few more seconds, and then it turned and it walked through the grass back into the deeper part of the woods where the trees were. When you're a kid, you got so many other things on your mind. The toys you want to ask for Christmas, what's going to happen at school, what's going to happen on the weekend. So I guess when I was 13, 14 years old, I didn't really think of it very much. I kind of put this encounter into the back of my head. And I really must, looking back now, I have to admit, I think it might have been a juvenile one. I think it might have been a teenager that was curious, a teenage, squatch that must have been curious that I was there. It seemed like it was just watching me and just curious about me. It didn't really make any gestures that were threatening. It didn't bare its teeth. It didn't move its arms and wave at me. Just stared at me, and when I acknowledged it, it turned around and walked back into the woods. And it didn't sound very heavy. So I guess, as I kind of got older, I didn't really think very much of this encounter because it really wasn't that frightening or out of the ordinary, so to speak. But you grow up and you get older, of course, as one does. And nothing we can do about that, but other things take precedent in the front of your mind, and you shove these thoughts and these experiences, you kind of shove them in a box, and you put that box in the corner somewhere on a dusty shelf, You think, oh, well, that wasn't really anything to be considerate of in the now, in the here, and where I am. So you don't think of it. Well, that encounter happened when I was a young man, and I have had other supernatural type experiences where I've seen things, but this isn't the time for that, so I'm not going to talk about those. But I do truly wonder if there are some people on this planet, on this earth, that are maybe destined to have these experiences. Maybe their vibration is a little bit closer. Maybe that's why they can see these things and why these things appear to them. I don't know. I really don't know why. But moving on, that was my first encounter when I was a young man, back in 2004. And really, like I said, it just happened on bright, sunny summer afternoon. It must have been in August, I think, in 2004. And it just came and went, and never really had much of a precedent in my life or mind. I never really thought much of it. And of course, I did enjoy, as I got older, I did learn to enjoy some monster movies and other movies like that. But like Godzilla, I do enjoy Godzilla. Some of these older monster movies are really entertaining, but I never really was super frightened of them, nor did I take them. I never really took them very seriously. It was just for entertainment, So I wasn't obsessed. I was never really obsessed with scary movies. Any time when that happened, it wasn't really on my radar. I had lots of other things to think about. So then I got older, and I did enjoy some scary movies and some scary books, but then I kind of grew out of that time, and I discovered these podcasts on YouTube here where people talk about their experiences and people share what they've seen, and it can be very discouraging. It can be very discouraging when you never really went looking for anything like this to happen. I can safely say before my first experience, I never really cared about this kind of thing. It was never really on my mind. I didn't really watch movies that were scary before that point. My parents didn't let me. I raised in a very good household, kind, loving parents, and they didn't allow bad media, scary media, to come into our lives. So really, I didn't really think about that kind of thing. And I definitely wasn't looking for an experience on that day. So, no, it wasn't at the front of my mind at all. But again, growing up, getting older, and discovering some of these internet podcasts where people talk about these things, it becomes interesting. It became interesting to me, and believe it or not, one day I was listening to a podcast and someone was talking about how they described the creature they sighted as having no neck and being black as coal. Now that I think of it, even the eyes were black. Of course, the first experience that I had happened in the daytime, so there wasn't any chance for reflection, but everything about it was just dark, black as coal. This whole creature, head to toe, I assume. I didn't see beyond the belly button down, but I assume the whole thing was black as coal. No tail. No tail. Very, very rounded head. No pointy ears. So this memory kind of came back out of that dusty box in the corner of the room, and I realized one day that, I actually did have a sighting of something that I couldn't quite explain, and this is the best way I could explain it. This is the most logical thing I could come to. And of course, it didn't end there. So 2004, we fast forward, went to college, didn't do too much with college. I worked several jobs here and there in different factories. And after a while, I realized that I couldn't do much else. I think or it's in the blood. It's not really something you can walk away from. It's either you want to do the farming or you want to walk away from it. It's one or the other. It's a love or a hate kind of situation. And I realized, fairly on that I hate working for people who don't even know my name and people who treat me like a number, and people who never say thank you or good job. So I went back to the farm and I decided to build my life here. I didn't really move very far, but I never craved to be in the big city and make thousands of dollars. No, I just wanted to be left alone. I'm one of those guys, I guess you could say. I just like to be left alone. And fast forward from 2004, when my first experience happened, like I said, I put it in the back of my head and I never really thought about it until years and years later. Moved down the road from the farm, decided that's what I wanted to do with my life, and started working the farm. I found a lovely girl, and she became my wife. My better half, honestly. She's very, very lovely, kind woman. She doesn't ask for much, so I'm very enamored with her, and she's not she's not a person who dabbles with magical thinking too much. She's also quite logical, like I am. So I think that's part of why we work so well together. Pretty logical people. We don't think too far outside of the box, I suppose. But so some of these experiences, actually, the next two happened after I got married. And my wife was present for both of these experiences. I did ask her if she wanted to be a part of this talk, but she refused. And God bless her. I think she's a little too nervous for that. She's kind of shy. But she would vouch for me, and she would say the same thing that I'm going to say here. We both talked it over the other night, and she thinks this is probably a good idea to talk about this stuff and get this stuff out there so people can hear that they're not alone. And that's the majority of my purpose for sharing what other experiences I have too. People need to be able to share their stories without feeling ashamed or scared, because again, a lot of these people who've had these experiences didn't necessarily go out in the woods and bang baseball bats together and use a megahorn and try to call them in like they're hollering for a pig. There's people get a little silly. They get a little carried away with that. Some of us people that have had these experiences never wanted anything to do with it. And some of us wish that we never had these experiences, but lo and behold, strange things have a way of finding their way to you sometimes. So this next experience happened in 2015. Like I was saying before, over the years, I had grown up, gone to college, wasted enough of my time with college, and I did learn how to weld, and I enjoy welding quite a bit. It's really fun. It's really, really fun, but it's really hard on your body. And all instructors were really swell guys, but they had very, very, very thick, what they would call Coke bottle glasses. So their eyes were cooked pretty bad, and that always steered me away from doing it professionally. I always wanted to know the knowledge that came with it. I just didn't necessarily want to do it for anyone but myself. So I did learn a few things from college, but I brought those skills back to the farm. So married, moved down the road. Wife and I haven't started our family yet. There's no little people around yet. And I guess this experience happened at night. It happened, when was this? Was this later in the year? I think this was more in the springtime of 2015. I do believe it was more in the spring. Everything was still green. Wasn't snow on the ground. But I'll have to say, the way that we set up our home, once we had gotten married and we were lucky enough to buy a double wide, I set it up possibly on a strange angle. But the way we had this house set up, you could see for miles. And I really appreciated that. I liked the view a little bit better, so I could see where things were coming. Now, everything out here in the thumb is flat as a pancake. Most all of it. All the land out here is very flat. Very flat. So besides the patches of trees and small little forests here and there, it's quite flat. So you can see quite far. And this particular evening, this was before we even had our first boy, before we had our first child, my wife and I were just kind of putzing around the house. I think we were getting ready for bed, getting some snacks or something from the pantry. I think I was getting some snacks. And the room where the pantry is has a window that faces this patch of woods. And this patch of woods is down the road, not even a quarter mile. And then there's a 4-way road. You take that 4-way to the left, another half a mile, and you're closer. So it's like if you followed the road on the shape of an L, you'd run right past this patch of woods, but it was quarter mile away, maybe half a mile away from our house. No more, about a quarter. It was not as far as a half. And I was looking out the window because something kind of caught my eye that night, and it was, I don't know if it was a full moon. I think it was a fading moon. It was not super bright, but you could still see a little bit. So I think the moon was fading. But anyways, I looked out the window and at this patch of trees down the road, about half a mile. And there's nothing blocking my vision to see this patch of trees, but these trees, I don't think they weren't very old trees. There weren't very many big ones in there. There were not very many big trees in there. But there were a few. There was a couple good big oak trees. And this patch of wood is on the same, as the crow flies, it's the same direction as this gravel pit where I had my first sighting. It's kind of in the same general area over there. And if you ask me, I think the patches of trees are connected. And they run over there by the pit. And I don't go there. I'll tell you later, there's some good reasons why I don't go into those woods. But anyways, so I noticed this patch of woods, and there were 2 lights, red, very red. Now, I know they say that sometimes these squatches can be accompanied by orbs. And the more I think about it, the more I think that might be actually what was going on. Because these red lights were shimmying up and down the trees. There were 2 of them. right next to each other. And it was the strangest thing I think I'd almost ever seen. Now, I've seen some strange things in the sky. I really have. I've seen some very strange things, but that was pretty strange. And these two red lights, they weren't blinking, but they were kind of fading. How do you say? In and out. From brighter to less bright. And these two lights were shimming up and down these trees, and they were going up and down at the same speed and then down and up at different speeds, and they would alternate. And I mean, I really didn't know what to make of it. I stood there at the window, in the house. I did not know what it was. I mean, we have these big power lines out here, and they have red lights on them, but these lights were moving up and down. And they weren't strobing the way that the tower lights move. Red lights. And I thought to myself, well, it must be a cherry picker. Maybe there's a team with a cherry picker out there, because those cherry pickers have lights on them, those big telephone equipment machines. But that wouldn't make any sense, because why would they be moving the bucket up and down that fast? Why would they be moving the bucket like that? You'd shake the guy silly. So I stood there standing. I might have been in my pajamas. I think we were getting ready for bed, like I was saying, and I called my wife over. I says, "Hey, what do you see?" And she kind of stopped, stared out the window, and her mouth kind of popped open for a second. She goes, "I don't know what that is." And we both kind of stood there flabbergasted for a little bit. And we didn't know. And we still don't know. But I'll say this, that patch of trees actually belonged to my family. And my dad had me take the excavator. We have some equipment, and I pushed down all those trees a few years ago to make more room for some farmland. The farmers are hurting. They really need as much land as they can get. And I think he wants to maximize his land. It was a pretty small patch of trees, but it was pretty close to the house in a way, in its own way, as the crow flies, That was really strange. It wasn't like the lights that are on the telephone towers or the radio towers. It was not like those lights. Now, if you ask me in my mind, if you could picture a bear, hugging a tree with all four of its limbs and shimmying up and down a tree, and if it had a red light on its head that was going lighter and brighter, maybe that's what it could have been. So I don't know. I don't know exactly. I think it was some kind of orb. Both of those had to have been some kind of orb. Maybe it was two juvenile squatches that were playing in the trees. But that is not where the story ends. It's not where the story ends. So that was strange. And you could, I guess you could argue one way or the other that, you were seeing things, or maybe it was just the tower lights. But I will say this, those lights never appeared in that spot again until the forest was torn down. Later that year, in 2015, we planted corn around our home. Like I said, the little double wide on the lot there. And this house was surrounded on 3 sides by corn. So I really don't care for when that happens. I don't care for when that happens, because the corn gets quite tall. The corn can grow up to 8 feet tall sometimes. And I'm a fairly big guy. I'm over 6 feet. I'm about 6'2". So tall corn isn't necessarily intimidating, I wouldn't say. But what makes me nervous is how well it can provide cover or concealment. Things can get right up into your yard and you won't see them until they pop out of the corn. That's what kind of concerns me. So this home was surrounded on 3 sides by this tall corn, and the corn can sometimes grow up to be about 8 feet tall. And me, myself, I was never a very small person, so I'm about 6'2" tall. And the corn being tall never really intimidated me too much. But the logical concern was always about what the corn could hide. And, I love having chickens. I enjoy my chickens very much, and I've always been on guard to see what could get into my yard. I don't really have a fence, but it's so open out here, except when there's corn, you can see for a long way. But I have to be protective, and I have to be on guard to make sure my chickens are safe too. So I never really liked it when the corn was planted around the house like that, especially at night. Oh my goodness, at night. At night, it really gives you the heebie-jeebies. It's spooky. You know that the corn doesn't have eyes, but it feels like the corn is looking at you. And the light of your porch never cuts very deep into the corn. Never. You'll hear deer. Sometimes, if you're unlucky, you'll hear some raccoons fighting, and they throw a fuss. Raccoons really make a lot of noise when they fight, but if you've lived out here and you've heard these things before, oh, that's just raccoons. So you kind of become accustomed. I'm not a super big hunter, but I can still identify some tracks. I can still look at what's happened in the grass and say, okay, this is a bedding area, or this is a whatever kind of area where they laid down for the night. You can kind of learn to read the ground a little bit. And the raccoons, gosh, they just tear things up. But this was another year. This was another year when we had decided to plant corn around this property. So 2020. Okay, yes, the red lights in the trees was back in 2015. 2020 was when we had our encounter in the corn. That was in November. That would have to have been in November of 2020, because we didn't have all the corn taken off yet. We still had some corn that was left standing. It was either late November or early October. I don't think it was anywhere near close to Halloween, but it was the end of October, the beginning of November. There was still some corn that was up in the fields. We hadn't taken all of it off yet. My wife and I, unfortunately, both have problems with cigarettes. So we will do our best to keep that problem to ourselves, and we try not to be gross about our smoking, so we go outside. And we don't smoke in the home. We only smoke outside on the porch. And this one particular evening, it wasn't that cold, but it was getting colder. It was getting there. That time of the year when you can kind of feel that fall is coming in. So we were on our porch, on our double wide there. And the corn was surrounding the whole lot. It's only about a 2-acre lot, so it's a small lot with the double wide and a couple barns. And as it was, the porch faces the field, so you can see the corn very, very easily. And we had floodlights. We still do. We have floodlights on the back porches there on the double wide. So it throws a lot of light. It throws a lot of light out into the yard and right up to the corn. Pretty good. And you can't see past the first few rows of corn, of course, but you can see the edge of your grass pretty well. So we were talking and having our cigarettes, and I don't know if we were drinking coffee or energy drinks or what were we drinking, but there was no alcohol involved. And we've had many, 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 many instances where deer would run into the yard. They really liked the corn, and they still do. So many whitetail. Oh my goodness, so many whitetail where I am. They're everywhere. But they would often bring their fawns. Mama deer would bring their fawns into the yard because we don't have a dog. We have a barn cat, and that's about the only pet we have. And the barn cat really doesn't bother with the deer, and the deer don't really feel scared by the barn cat. So we get a lot of wildlife, and I really like that. I really like that. Although the cats probably do eat some of the birds, unfortunately. Anyways, so the deer felt safe. The deer always felt safe in this yard. We wouldn't bother them or yell at them. And they would eat from the apple tree in the front yard too. So it wasn't unusual for us to see deer in the yard munching whatever they could eat in the morning, at night, during the middle of the day. They like the safety of the yard. Well, this night, we were on the porch, and a deer, I think it was a young buck. I didn't see any antlers, but it was a young one, and it came busting through the corn on the south side of the corn, and it came into the yard. Well, again, this is par for the course. This is nothing unusual. So we just kind of sat there talking quietly and watching the deer. And this deer didn't really seem like it was entirely comfortable. It seemed like it was a bit on edge. It seemed a little twitchy. And I've seen deer behave strange before, but that's usually not a good sign. It means they're probably sick. So this deer just seemed nervous. It just seemed nervous. This deer kept looking around, It didn't spend much time with its head down eating. It was more nervous than hungry, I think. And after about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, this deer turned around and pranced off through the corn. We didn't really think anything of it. You can hear it rustling the corn and think, okay, well, that was nice. Not even a minute later, maybe 2 minutes later, actually, that deer came busting right back through that corn. And it busted right into the yard, out into the light. And that deer was panting quite heavily. Quite heavily. It looked like it had just run a marathon. But we just heard it disappear into the corn not even a few minutes ago. How could it be that winded? I didn't understand. But it was very, very exhausted. Its mouth was hanging open and it looked really tired. And we couldn't figure out why. Well, this night, the moon was waxing, I think is the right word. It was getting more full. So the moon was up and there was a bit more moonlight. And we noticed this deer panting, nervous. We haven't left the porch, of course. We're still just kind of confused. What's going on here? And we look over to the eastern side of the yard where there's still, more corn. 3 sides. 3 sides of this yard were fenced off with corn from the field, right up to the edge. And the moon was kind of behind the corn a bit. And we saw a shadow peeking over the top of the corn. And I would say it had the very, very same familiar shape of the one that I saw when I was 13, 14 years old. It didn't really seem to have much of a cone head. Didn't really seem to have much of a neck. Like some people say when they see these things, they say it looks like it doesn't have a neck at all. And I concur. They're absolutely correct. It looks like there is no neck. But what really, really kind of got me was the eyes. This thing was staring at us. Again, being stared at by a Sasquatch, and it sees you because it's looking right at you. And I'm not kidding when I say this. And my wife and I were both in our right mind. But the eyes were glowing. Green. Green. Very, very green. And it wasn't the same kind of effect you get with a reflection. they were producing their own light. It really looked that way to me. You know, I'm a pretty simple guy. I try to explain things the most logical way. I leave room for the fantastic and the paranormal, though. I really do. Because there's a lot that we don't understand, but these eyes were glowing. They were glowing, and they were green, almost neon green. And they were fixed right on my wife and I on our back porch. Now, the corn this year had gotten up to about 7 feet tall. And the head of this creature was about a foot above the top of the corn. So I would place the height of this one possibly around 7.5, 8 foot tall. I'd say that's a pretty conservative estimate. And once it had registered between my wife and I what was really happening, we froze for a moment. We really did. I mean, we weren't necessarily petrified, terrified, but it's kind of that moment where you go, ooh, what's that? You stop what you were saying, you stop what you were thinking, and you focus. And we both focused in on this creature that was staring at us. And again, it was eerily similar to the first experience where no gestures were made. The thing was black as coal. But of course, this happened at night, so I could be wrong. But it seemed very, very dark fur, dark face, except for the eyes that were glowing. I didn't really feel anger. You know, I don't necessarily want to cuddle up with these things, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that Squatch was more than likely trying to hunt that deer. And the deer being a stinker, probably knew that, oh, these people, you know, there's people back on this porch. If I go here, then it won't bother me. And the deer was probably right on its instincts there, because that thing was right on the edge of the corn, just deep enough into the corn so that we couldn't see its body, but close enough that we could definitely see its head and the top of its shoulders. And again, I didn't necessarily feel like I was the target. I was not the object of attention for that creature. It was the deer, and the deer probably got chased around in a circle. The poor thing probably got chased in a circle, and it run right back to where it started. And we both kind of locked eyes with this thing for a few good seconds, and it just stared. And I'll remember this for as long as I live. What ended up happening next is what was the only thing I could think of. And my wife and I both started praying. We're not super religious people. We believe, in the Bible, but we're not super religious. We just believe. And I tell you the truth, we started saying the Lord's Prayer. We started saying the Lord's Prayer outside in the chilly night together. And I believe in the power of prayer. And this encounter honestly reaffirmed in many ways that there is power in prayer. We were slightly afraid to see this thing, I guess. We weren't petrified, but we both had enough cognizance to say, we need to pray. And we started praying, like I said, and this being didn't growl, didn't show its teeth, it didn't lunge, it didn't move very much. It just kept staring. And after we made it 3/4 of the way through the Lord's Prayer, it turned and it started to walk away through the corn. And I guess it realized that it didn't really want to be that close to us. I do think the prayer helped to deter it and keep it away. I mean, I do believe in guardian angels. But this Squatch, he kind of just turned, and he or she, I don't know if it was a male or a female, I suppose, but it turned and it walked away through the corn. And the freakiest part almost of this encounter was when it was walking away, because my goodness, this one must have been big. This one must have been the daddy of the tribe or of the clan. We could feel the ground vibrating when this thing walked away through the corn. And the deer stayed right in the yard, just happily munching. I think the deer was happy for the free protection it got that night. I don't know what became of the deer, but that was quite an experience. At least I could say it reacted to the prayer. So I do believe there's power in prayer. And I'm glad that these things do have some limitations in a way. If you know how to handle it, I believe. I think that's probably the best way you can handle these things, unless you're right up face to face, of course, but who wants to be face to face with these things? I sure don't. I didn't ask to see them. I didn't go looking for them. So that was in November of 2020. That very same fall, we had other experiences in the home. And these things would happen kind of randomly, but one very prominent experience that sticks out in my mind, this happened after the corn incident, where in the back of the double wide, I was laying down in my bed, and that bedroom has a big kind of half moon window in it, and another window closer to the bed. I was laying on my bed and I was playing on my phone, as one does. And this must have been 9 or 10 in the evening. It's getting on. It was getting late. And this window, we had curtains, we had drapes, and we had blinds too. Of course, nobody wants the blinds for very long. They get dirty. But we did have blinds. Later on, we did have curtains, but all the windows were covered in this house. I can't emphasize that enough. Especially after the corn encounter, we decided that, you know what, it's probably a good idea that we start covering our windows. Because I have listened to a few of these podcasts at that point, and learning about how they behave, you learn what to avoid. So this window was covered. I was laying on my bed, and from the top corner of the window came 5 very, very firm raps, as if you would rap on a door, to knock on a door. So it was tap, 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 tap. I did not open that window. I did not open that blind. I did not choose to look, because I did not want to see. I already had a feeling in my heart what was on the other side of that window. But it definitely caught my attention. I did get up from my bed, and I moved to a different room for a bit. I was the only one in the room at the time. But it made me wonder if the one that we saw in the corn had remembered us. And maybe it wanted to make friends, or maybe it wanted just to see if it could get a rise out of us. Either way, that wasn't the only thing that happened that year. There was another instance again in the fall, where, if you ask me, I think one of these things was trying to, in a way, make contact, or maybe see what it could get away with. I'm not sure. They're very curious. They're very, very curious things. I don't know why they're so curious, but they seem to be really curious. They either want the attention, or they want something that you have. And I don't like to think about the second thing. So, again, this instance, almost the same situation, but this time my wife was in the room. Again, this room on this double wide has kind of a big window with a half moon slice at the top, if you can picture that in your head. It's a nice window, but it faces into the field too. And this window again had blinds and curtains. So we didn't really want anything to look in, and we didn't really want to look out. Just to put it nicely, we didn't like that idea. And thankfully, I'm a blessed man. I'm very blessed because my wife has also had several experiences, not including the red light incident, not including the one that was in the corn staring at us. I mean, she grew up with several supernatural experiences happening to her as well. So she understood. I'm very, very lucky for that. Very, very lucky for that. Some people have problems with their spouses and they don't understand, or they think the other one is paranoid or crazy. Well, I'm blessed. I don't have that issue to deal with. So this night we were both in the bedroom at the back of the double wide. And we heard something brushing up against the window. And it was very, very big. Very big. This was also accompanied by a very, very stinky smell. That smelled like, I know people say it smells like a skunk and a dead carcass, and they're pretty close to that. It's pretty spot on if you ask me. And something was rubbing up against the back of the house. Almost like when you see these nature documentaries, when you see a bear scratching its back on a tree. It kind of sounded like that. And it was rubbing up against the house. And, well, again, I consider myself a man of action. So I grabbed one of my bladed implements, and I don't know why I had this feeling that something was pushing up against the window, because it was right on the other side of the window. And if it was pushing up against the window, I don't mind saying that these windows in this house were not very good. They were old. They were not great windows. I was a little nervous the window would break. Just this horrible, heavy sandpaper sound, on the siding and on the window. And my wife and I both didn't really know what to do, but we did what we know, and we started to pray again. And the smell and the sound did go away. More and more I get the feeling that this thing was hoping we would interact a little bit more, I guess you could say. I do think it wanted some attention, but I also don't know why it wanted attention from us. I don't understand that part. I think maybe when you see these things, you become connected to them somehow. I don't know. Maybe they get your scent and they remember what you smell like. I don't know. I really don't know. So this was in 2020. After the corn incident. And I thank God that none of these incidents have been violent. I can't stress that enough. I thank God that none of these incidents have been violent and no one's been hurt. Haven't lost any animals. Haven't lost any chickens. I'm very thankful for that. But it's still slightly unnerving because you know that more than likely these things are still around. And you know that more than likely they're probably still where I think they're at, and where I think they're at is back in those woods by that pit, by that gravel pit. So, the incident that happened in 2020 with the corn and the window tapping and the window rubbing, the creature rubbing on the side of the house, it was a bit strange, but this was after our first child was born. And as he got a little older and he learned, to talk a little bit, he would confide in us that he was having dreams. And most of the time, the dreams don't make too much sense, and most of the time they're very whimsical little dreams that he'll tell you, "Oh, I had a dream about this, Daddy." or I had a dream about that, and that's lovely, and that's good. That's good that you listen to your kids, and you take the time to entertain their imagination and encourage that and foster that growth. So I always enjoyed asking him, did you have any good dreams? And the one morning he was very this is again was still about in 2020. He was very quiet the one morning when I asked him that question. And he didn't want to talk about it. And it took a little bit of coaxing. And eventually he did tell us, my wife and I, that he had a dream the other night of a creature in the barn with red eyes. Now, to hear something like that from your own child is kind of concerning. But he said in his dream there was a creature in the barn that had red eyes, and it came out of the barn and it was walking up to the house, and he said that was the end of the dream. But gosh, what a horrible dream for a little child, for a kid. It really made me nervous. It really made me nervous that these things, because I've heard these stories too, where they try to manipulate children, and they try very hard to get the children outside. Obviously, that's a pretty heavy thought. So I did not like to entertain that thought. At the same time, being a parent, you have to. You have to at some point. You can't just put it in the dusty old box in the corner of your mind anymore. You have to be present. When he confided in me about that dream, it definitely concerned me. He also had, I would venture a guess that he did have some encounters of his own, of the window tapping variety. I don't think he's ever looked past the window to see what's on the other side. I really pray he hasn't, but he has told us before too that something tapped on my window last night. And that happened. Good grief. I know. It sounds cliche. It sounds very cliche, but that happened to him 3 or 4 separate times where something would tap on the window of his room. It didn't tap on my window anymore. I think once it figured out where the kids' room was, it moved over to that window. And my boy was losing sleep. He was having a hard night. When that happened, he had a hard night. He couldn't really sleep after that. He was restless. I can't blame him. I can't blame him. I don't think any of the media that he's been exposed to has brought any of this on. He used to be afraid of Scooby-Doo, which is kind of sweet. They used to enjoy Scooby-Doo, but then it started to give them nightmares, so we said, okay, no more. No more Scooby-Doo. Find a different show. But he seemed genuinely disturbed when these things would happen. It seemed so much more different when he said, oh, I had a bad dream about being chased by, a ghost in a blanket. Okay, well, that's a Scooby-Doo dream. That's a Scooby-Doo dream. But then for him to tell you, oh, I had a dream about a black creature in the barn with red glowing eyes, and it came out of the barn and walked up to the house. That's oddly specific. That's very, very specific, and that's something that I think all parents, you should pay attention. Sometimes kids do this for attention. Yes, sometimes it's for attention, but sometimes there's something genuinely there. We have to pay attention, because I do believe these things, they prey on children. And that's really scary to think about. It's really awful scary to think about. I love to learn about history, and I love to learn about things that have happened, and I've learned about what was his name, that fellow? Joseph Smith, I'm not sure. There was an Indian fellow who had a band of warriors that hunted some of these things down in Oklahoma, the Tubby Men. I've learned about the Tubby Men. And the Native American legends, I believe they're real. I really, truly believe that they're real, and I don't think that they are just myth and legend. And I think that the natives are correct when they say that these things do target women and children. So, there's that. Now, where do I think these things are coming from? That's a whole nother little story in itself. And I'd be happy to tell it. Because I think there's something going on fairly close to where I live. So these woods that run back to the gravel pit, these woods are fairly thick. Fairly thick. They're not old growth. They're not old growth, and they're not white pines, okay? So it's a lot of poplar and birch, oak, a lot of dead ash. Because God help us, the ash bug. The ash bug has just decimated the species, which is a shame. So there's not much ash left, but there's plenty of other stuff. There's poplar and oak and birch and maple, lots of maples. And so there's these patches of woods, and again, like I say, they're not old growth. But I think with all my heart that there's some old things in them. If that makes any sense. When my grandma was still around, she told us stories. And if anybody's ever seen the movie Pocahontas, you'll remember the scene towards the end where the clouds come together and they crash in the sky. And my grandma told me this story of that happened around here once. And you wouldn't think, but Michigan was very, very heavily populated with Native American tribes all over the place before the white man came. So why wouldn't their history and their legends, it's not irrelevant. It's very, very pertinent. So she said when she was little, she saw the clouds do that in the sky. I always thought, well, that's just fascinating. I wish I could see that myself. I have seen strange things in the sky at night. If people just went out on their porches and looked up, you'd see things you couldn't believe. But my grandma also told us that back in the woods, in the area, the same patch of woods where I saw those red lights, and like I'm saying, this is a continuous patch. I say patch, and it sounds like it's just an acre or two. No, these patches are connected. A lot of them are connected. So these woods can get rather deep, and you wouldn't think so because, it's not on the side of a mountain, but these patches of woods, they get kind of heavy and deep, and the light doesn't really cut through the top very much. It's quite a heavy canopy, and these trees grow pretty strong. But she mentioned, my grandma Pat, when she was with us, she mentioned that there were painted rocks back in this patch of trees. And she said when she was a little girl, they went back there and saw them. These painted rocks. And all over Michigan, you can go and find little monuments, little side of the road, kind of touristy things where there's painted rocks. They're here and there. I think there's more than a few burial mounds too. But I'm not certain if there's a burial mound back here where this patch is. I'm not sure. But quite frankly, I don't really want to go and find out. These woods over here where this pit is, I think there's some serious activity that goes on in there. Now, some of the researchers will talk about how there's several varieties of these things, several different species or subspecies, and I'm not an expert. I consider these people more intelligent than myself because they've spent so much time. And if they're seeking the truth and their heart is in the right place and they seek the truth, well, then I'm going to listen because that's what I want. I'm going to seek the truth with you. But these woods have a little bit of a history. And as far as I can understand it, there are painted rocks back in these woods, and there might be some kind of artifacts. There might even be a burial mound. I'm not certain about that. But again, I don't really have much of a desire to go back into these woods because of the story I'm going to tell you next. Now, before I got married, I had just come back to the farm, and I was working with my dad on the farm. Well, we of course, farmers love to talk. Farmers talk. That's what we're really good at. We could talk all day. And being a small town, everybody knows everybody's business. For better or for worse, everybody knows. And people would stop in to the shed. We'd be working on a machine on a tractor, and people would stop in and we'd drop everything and we'd talk. Because that's what you do. It's rude not to. It's kind of the way I was raised. You don't just ignore people. You stop what you're doing and you give them your time and you give them your attention. Well, this led to many opportunities for me to eavesdrop, maybe a little. Because, I'm the help, so I have to keep working, and usually the boss would get to go and talk. And, well, I still had my ears free. My hands may have been busy, but my ears were free. So I could listen. And I heard a story that really helps to make all of this make sense. Years and years and years ago, a family friend stopped by the shed and told us a story about an incident that had just happened recently. And this fellow who stopped by the shed, he's a friend of the family. We knew him. We knew his family. Like I said, it's a very small town, so everybody knows everybody, for better or for worse. You try to keep out of trouble that way, which is good. Now, this family friend had stopped by the shed to talk with my dad, and he relayed this story about, like I was saying, something that had happened a few days before, the week earlier. I'm not exactly certain. But I have no reason to believe that this family friend would try to pull a yarn to us. I don't think he would try to pull our leg or spin a yarn. How do you say? However you say it. And the story that he was conveying to us, however, wasn't a bad story. It was just something that had happened. And to get back to this pit, you have to take one road. There's one road that goes back to this pit, and there's tree tunnels. The trees overshadow this road, and this road cuts back, takes a few turns, and if you follow it, there's houses back there too. I've always wondered what stories they have to tell. I bet you they have even better stories, honestly. They're a bit closer to where I think this is all happening. And it's only right down the road from me, but I'm almost too nervous to even go investigate, honestly. So on this one solitary road that leads back to, if you need to get into the pit, into this big clump of trees, this mini forest, our family friend, who has his own business, he noticed that there was a car off the side of the dirt road. And this was years ago, and this is a secondhand story, but it was relayed to me from my grandma and my dad. So I heard a little bit of it, but I didn't hear the whole thing. I got to hear the whole story afterwards. I don't think that he wanted to talk about it too much. People around here, they don't like to talk about stuff like that too much because it makes them, they get embarrassed, I think. So he was relaying this story about this car that had stopped off the side of the road. And he stopped to ask if this person needed any help. Out here, it's just kind of what you do. You know, you're polite in that way, and you help people when they need help. So he stopped to see if he needed any help with his car, with his machine. And this fellow on the side of the road that leads back into this pit. Again, this is going to tie it all together here. This fellow mentioned to our family friend that no, he said, I don't need any help. Thank you for stopping. And they got to talking. Well, they talked for a few minutes, I'm sure, but he mentioned to our family friend that he was from the University of Massachusetts. Now, I don't know what a university really is interested in this kind of area. It's not really much going on here. But one thing he mentioned about why he had come from the University of Massachusetts was that he was some kind of a researcher. And this fellow on the side of the road who had his car parked there mentioned that he was researching, get this, and I'm not kidding, portals. So this fellow had come all the way from the East Coast to our little podunk town, right to my backyard, pert near, because he was researching portals in the area. Well, to say the least, being, younger at the time when I heard this story, it definitely had my imagination running. So I kept inquiring more and more and more, and I tried to do a lot of my own homework. And I come to find out, depending on what map you look at, if you learn about the ley lines, the magnetic lines that run underneath of the Earth's surface, underneath the Earth's crust, there's magnetic properties that are surrounding those streaks of heavy minerals or whatever it is. And one of those lines does cut through the thumb of Michigan. And it does cut fairly close to where I am located. So I guess for me, that was a slight bit of validation that there might actually be something strange going on back there in those woods. And again, I don't have any desire to go back and necessarily investigate or see if there's anything back there, because there's another part of this story. I have more reason to believe that there is actually something strange going on in there, because there were two incidences that followed. Let me get my facts straight here. These incidences happened years before. These two incidences happened years before the fellow with his car on the side of the road from the university was talked to. But ironically, the fellow who talked to them, the incidents happened to his own family. I'm not going to mention any names. Because I do want to keep that private for their own sake. I'm not trying to cause trouble. But there were these two brothers, the brothers of the fellow that stopped to help the researcher. These sons, his sons, two brothers. I don't know if I'm confusing that a little bit. Maybe people are a little confused with how I'm saying this. I hope not. The two sons of the fellow that stopped to help the researcher on the side of the road. These incidences happened years before the researcher stopped on the side of the road over here. But again, it all, if you ask me, it all seems connected. It all seems connected because his two sons had gone hunting in those woods for years. They're young men. They weren't little kids, but they were young men who wanted to hunt, and they went into those same woods to hunt for years and years and years. Well, one year, the one brother had come back from his hunt, and I think he was changed. He was slightly different. He changed, his personality changed, is what I understand the story goes. After he came out of those woods that one time, and it wasn't any specific time, it was just that he came back from a hunt, and his whole personality had changed. And unfortunately, I think he might have drank himself to death. If I remember correctly, I think he had a problem after that. And if you ask me, it was partially to help him cope. And I'm not kidding when I say the second brother actually would hunt in the same woods. And this incident happened maybe a year or two after the first, where the first brother came out of the woods and he was different. So this happened shortly after, maybe a few years after. The second brother went hunting in those same woods, and he came back, and he was very he was changed too. He wasn't the same person, and God help their family, because he tried to off himself. He tried to off himself. He tried to take himself out, and he failed. And now he's at a recovery home, and he's being taken care of, and that's just awful. That's just so awful to happen to any family, really. Any family. Someone's family go through something like that. It's pretty darn terrible. So, if you ask me, connecting all the dots, looking back and trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together, I would venture a guess that those two fellows saw something that broke their minds. I think they both saw something that they shouldn't have seen, something they weren't prepared for, in those woods. And it affected them. And again, like I was just saying, their stories did not end very well. The family was traumatized by what happened to them. They changed. They changed after they came out of those woods the times they went hunting. So, I guess anyone can draw their own conclusions. I know people have problems, but that's definitely not a problem that I desire. And I really would rather not go back in there and look. But there's enough mystery around the area. There's enough mystery around that patch of woods. And knowing what I've seen, and knowing what other people have experienced, that family friend and his sons who came out of the woods and they became different after they... It doesn't really matter. They never said anything. They never told anyone that I ever heard of what they saw. I think it maybe stupefied them. I don't know, but it changed them. It changed them, and whatever they saw in those woods, it probably broke their minds. And I feel pity for people that have that happen to them. These things that people see, sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's just too much to handle. And I've got one more slight story. One more slight story of this area. And it's actually related again to the same patch of woods. And this takes place, oh good grief, years and years and years ago, when my dad was he must have been a teenager. He must have been in his early 20s. But, he worked the same land. He worked the same area. We plant the same plots. We've kept a lot of the same plots over the years. So that hasn't changed too much. In the forest, the trees haven't changed too much. But he did recall to me a story once when I was younger of seeing a large, what he called a black cat. I've heard rumors of people saying, oh, I've seen black cat before. I don't know if it is actually a black cat or if it could be one of those dogmen things. But he recalled to me the story when he was young, working in a field, and this large, very large black, what he said looked like a black panther from a distance. He was pretty far away, but he mentioned that it did have a very long black tail. And on all fours, this creature crawled out of the beans in between the space that was cleared. That's where he saw it, into the woods. So these things, I can't help but feel like these things are around. And they either really, really know how to hide very well, or, I mean, some people believe that they can hop in between space and time. I'm not sure. But I do know that there's only a handful of people who want to give any of these sightings any kind of credibility. There's only a handful of people that want to think about this. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that have had experiences and seen strange things that they didn't ask to see, but they just don't want to talk about it. So, I guess that's what I'm here for. I've had these stories, these experiences over my short life. I'm not that old, pretty relatively short life. So I've seen these things, and I know in my heart that I didn't ask to see these things, but it happened anyways. And I encourage people, whether or not, you go to church or anything like that, you don't have to necessarily be religious, but we all need to have a very firm foundation. And for me, that's faith. That's my foundation, is my faith. So when you have a foundation, I don't think these occurrences will shake you as much. Or if you're just a very, very logical, hard-thinking person, maybe it doesn't affect you as much. But I don't like to think about these things being so close. And now I'm married and I have a family, and I will say this: I have put up more yard lights. And since the incident in 2020 with the tapping on the windows and the one that was peeking at us from the corn, since that incident, I have put up more solar-powered lights. They're very, very simple, and they're pretty cheap. I mean, if they break or if one of them doesn't want to work for you, you could always just replace it. But I would encourage people to do that. I would very much encourage yard lights. And we haven't really had too much going on after the lights have gone up. Thank goodness. So I definitely recommend the lights. Maybe even some yard cameras if you have the extra money. I believe they're out there. There's certain patches of woods that I think are very, very old and maybe sacred. Maybe they're sacred to a different group. Maybe that's why these things happen around these areas. The land is old. We're as a species, we're still young, but the land is old. The earth is old. Maybe there's a burial mound back in those woods. I know there's some scattered around Michigan. I know there are, but maybe this one is kind of a hush-hush one that nobody really knows about. I don't know. But I do think that being vigilant, keeping an eye on your family, and putting up more lights and cameras is never a bad idea. So I guess that's about all I have.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of run-down, no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. The sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out. I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards and double time. Getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, fried chicken, porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.